So we're looking tonight at image of the beast. Just a little quick recap. We looked at our study last week, Daniel chapter 3, the second part. And we realized that God had given Daniel the exact dream the king had but couldn't remember, gave him the interpretation. And after Daniel gave him the interpretation, the dream first of all, and then the interpretation, the king was beside himself. I mean, here was the mightiest monarch on earth at that time, and he actually honored Daniel, just gave him a great promotion in his cabinet, and his three friends, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, the Babylonian names Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were promoted to heads of provinces. And so the king had a partial conversion, because at the end he said, there is no other God like the God of Daniel. And he praised the God of Daniel. And he forgot about the gods of Babylon. But we find between Daniel chapter 3 and Daniel chapter 2, some time has elapsed. And the king has had a change of heart. And so our study tonight is absolutely fascinating. And it is a story. It's the narrative of the king's experience, but it has end-time implications. In other words, it's eschatological. It has lessons for you and I living in the last days, because what happened with the nation of Babylon and the king and his decree happen with mystical or spiritual Babylon before Jesus comes. Remember, the whole book of Daniel is a contest between the God of heaven and the gods of Babylon, the gods of this earth. It's about the God who is creator, who's the living God, and the God who has got a group of people that he wants to be true and faithful to him, who he wants to use to save the world. And of course, the devil, the dragon, working through the nations of this earth that have given themselves over to him to be an influence by him. And so very quickly, I'm just going to show you a chart here. So this is just by revision for last week. I've got there the feature metal, right? Then we've got the kingdom, what the metal stands for, which kingdom it is, and then the period of time. Now this is absolutely stunning. God gives it to Daniel in around about 600 BC, 602 BC, somewhere around there. And God gives Daniel what will happen from the time of the reign of Babylon right up until Jesus comes, the four world ruling empires and their impact on God's people, and how the devil uses these empires to war against God, his temple, and of course his word. And so the head of gold, of course, we understood, Daniel told us clearly, represented Babylon. And Babylon ruled from 605 to 539 BC. Chest and arms of silver represented Medo-Persia. Again, Daniel tells this to us. We're going to come to Daniel chapter 6, where Daniel actually tells us what this power, Daniel lived when this power takes over. But in Daniel chapter 5, the last king of Babylon, he was, well, I'm not going to say much about it now, but he was absolutely frightened because of mysterious writing on the walls of his palace. And so Daniel came in, and Daniel interpreted what the writing was and told him that this day your kingdom is given to the Medes and the Persians. And also in Daniel chapter 8, he mentions Medo-Persia. So he actually mentions the kingdom that rules. So that was from 539 BC to 331 BC. And then we've got, of course, the belly and thighs of bronze, which represents Greece. Again, Daniel tells in Daniel chapter 8, we'll look at that later on, and mentions the power of Greece, which was long before it was a world-dominating power. It was just a very small country with absolutely nothing much of an army. But God, through Daniel, predicts more than 200 years before that Greece would arise. He names the country, he names the power, the country, and he says its king, its notable horn would be its king, which of course refers to Alexander the Great. And then we come the legs of iron, which stands for, of course, the kingdom of Rome, ruled by the Caesars, pagan Roman Empire. And they ruled from 168 BC to 476 AD. And of course, that's the power in the time of Christ. and actually sanctioned Jesus to be crucified. Pilate was a Roman governor. And so the Bible actually tells us these powers before even we look at the history books. And then, of course, we come the feet of iron and clay. That's the divided kingdoms of the divided kingdom of Rome, pagan Rome, that became the 10 tribes or countries of Europe, Western Europe. And that was from 476 AD to present. Those countries, except for 3, are not there anymore. We'll find out when we get to Daniel chapter 7, why 3 of the tribes, which are Aryan tribes, the Heruli, the Vandals, the Ostrogoths, why they were completely destroyed. They are extinct. Why did this happen and who did it? And then we come the stone. The image, of course, or rather the symbol for the stone is the coming of Christ. Jesus says he is the rock of salvation. He is the rock that the builders rejected and has become the chief stone, the cornerstone. And of course, that represents the second coming. So the stone becomes a mountain, and the mountain is symbolic of God's kingdom. And remember, the feet of iron and clay, the iron is still Rome, but its phases change from pagan Rome to papal Rome. We'll study that in detail. But the clay was there. The clay is a symbol also of God's people, God's church. And so the stone that becomes a mountain, when Jesus comes, that kingdom will be established for eternity. And so, very briefly, that's what God revealed to Daniel. Daniel tells the king his dream, the interpretation. The king is beside himself. He's astonished. He's incredulous that the God of Daniel could give that information when the gods of Babylon failed completely. They, in fact, the Chaldeans, who were actually the PhDs, the religious side of the wise men of Babylon, they said there is no God. There's no man on earth that can tell the king's dream or interpretation because the gods don't dwell with men. And yet Jesus, our God, our Father, dwells in us through the Holy Spirit. And so very quickly, I'll just show you this chart here. We are following Bible prophecy through historicism, the method of historicism. In other words, we start at the time of the prophet and we go forward without missing out on anything. It's progressive. There are 2 other interpretations of Bible prophecy. One is called futurism, which is a gap method, and everything's pushed way in the future. That's not biblical. We're going to discover why as we go through the series. And then there's, of course, the other one, which is preterism. Preterism is everything was fulfilled in the past. And we will discover that this can be possible because historicism gives us the correct interpretation because it is progressive. So here is what it looks like in historicism. You can see there from the little chart there's the image there from the time of 605 BC, the time of Daniel and King Nebuchadnezzar, and it goes right through to the silver, Medo-Persia, to the bronze, Greece, to the iron, Rome, and then later on to the clay and iron, which is now pagan Rome to papal Rome, the European nations, and then going to the future right until Jesus comes. And so that's fascinating. I told you I would share some pictures of you when I went to the museum in Napoli or Naples in Rome, in Italy. And so this is the mosaic. It's made out of hundreds of thousands of little pieces. This was discovered in one of the homes after Mount Vesuvius exploded and all the lava destroyed all the people. And as they uncovered some of these homes, they found this incredible, some of it has gone away. You can see where the brown is, the mosaics or the stones have been lost somehow. But this is a picture of Alexander the Great going in against Darius. Darius is pictured there. And this picture that I'm showing you does not do justice to it because it's really can't even show you the beauty and extent of this here. It's a picture, but because I was in, I could look at it and touch and feel. The mosaic is absolutely incredible. It's really astounding. So this is the Battle of Ipsus, when the Medes and the Persians lost to the Greeks and led by Alexander the Great. And so this is fantastic Bible prophecy. And so that's what it looked like. And again, you can see the brown patches on the wall, some of the mosaics off. I mean, it's just like incredible stuff. And then I shared with you the rebuilt southern palace in Babylon. I'm standing there on what would have been the king's bedchamber, and just narrating the story of Daniel. This is the sign pointing to the gate of Ishtar. And if you look at the gate of Ishtar, because the city over time became buried, archaeologists, they got to dig and dig and dig and get down the foundation. So the walls that Saddam Hussein built above the city level, the foundations go much, much, much deeper. So it was a grand city. So I'm standing now at the bottom of the foundation of the walls of the outer walls of Babylon. And we're going to discover in Daniel chapter 5 that God prophesied the city would fall 150 years before by the prophet Isaiah. And so this city fell. It was thought to be impregnable. It was thought never possible to be overthrown, but it did. These are some of the carvings in the walls. That's the god Enlil. This is the god Marduk. It was part dragon and part the face was part dragon. The part of it was a jackal. It had claws of an eagle. But these are gods on the walls of Babylon. They had 36 gods, and the god Marduk was in charge of all 36. I'll talk to you about that a little bit later on. Again, you can see fascinating. These are the walls below ground. All you see there was below ground. And here's the Berlin Museum, where the original gate of Ishtar, in honor of the god of war and love, Ishtar, from where we get the pagan holiday of Easter, you can see again those same animals are depicted on those blue brick. That's blue brick. Those bricks are more than 2,500 years old. Fascinating. This is some of the lions that took pictures of there in Babylon, in the museum of, there was more than 300 of these lions all along the walls of the procession leading the gate of Ishtar. It was one of the most important gates. The king would always come there and offer offerings and sacrifice in the temple of Ishtar. I'll show you that the temple another day. These are some of the lions, and you can see again, this is the god of storms. It was called Adad, a bull. And this is Marduk. This is Marduk. And this is the team I was with led by Professor or Dr. Francois Duplessis. And this was my my guide. This is Iraqi man, very nice man, Mohammed, very, very nice man. Shame he lost his dad during the invasion of Kuwait, of Iraq rather, when the American forces occupied. And this is a fascinating picture. This is a picture of the whole plains of the area around Babylon. Now, you can see on the top left that Saddam Hussein's castle that he rebuilt, that he wanted to live where God said it will never be inhabited again by human beings. So he built that mound. The whole country is flat. And so we're going to talk about the plains of Judah. That's how it looks there. And I don't know if you can see in the distance here. I'm just putting my pointer here. There's a statue here. Here's a close-up of it. This is Hammurabi, one of the great leaders of the kingdom of Babylon long before Nebuchadnezzar. He ruled 1776 BC. But nobody was as great and popular as King Nebuchadnezzar. He was a great builder. And this is the original temple where the temple of Marduk used to be. It's all just ruins. And of course, there was the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Fascinating. It was one of the wonders of the world at that time. And the king, he made this garden for one of his wives that he married, because she came from a place where there was lots of greenery and mountains and beauty. And of course, Baghdad and where Babylon was, desert, semi-desert. And so she was so sad. The king made the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Absolutely fascinating. And this is what God had said through the prophet Jeremiah about Babylon. It says, Babylon shall become a heap, a dwelling place for jackals, an astonishment and a hissing, without an inhabitant. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. I've been to the exact site in the country of Lebanon, the site, Jordan, sorry, the country of Jordan, the site of where Sodom and Gomorrah used to be. It's barren. It's a plain of salt. And that's what Babylon had become. Nebuchadnezzar tried to rebuild it. Not Nebuchadnezzar, sorry. Saddam Hussein tried to rebuild it. He's gone, and no one still lives there, because the Bible said this in Isaiah 13 verses 20. It, after it was destroyed, will never be inhabited, nor will it be settled from generation to generation. And so when you go to the ruins of Babylon, it's still there. There's the ancient ruins in the forefront, and the background is Saddam Hussein's very ornate and expensive castle that he never, ever lived in. A testament to the Bible. And so the story in the book of Daniel is the story of God's kingdom and how the devil working to the kingdom of Babylon and the other 4 world empires to go against God, because we have 2 kings in the beginning. Daniel chapter 1, Jehoiakim and Nebuchadnezzar, 2 gods, the God of Jehovah, the God of Marduk, the sun god. You are the God of you got the cities, 2 cities, you got Babylon and you got Jerusalem. You got God's temple in Jerusalem that had been ransacked and finally burned by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC, and all the articles taken to Marduk's temple. And so it's a battle between the God of heaven and the gods of this earth, led by the dragon Satan. And you got 2 people. You got the Hebrews, you got the Babylonians. In mystical Babylon, in end time, it's God's people, spiritual Israel and spiritual Babylon. So just as God's people went into captivity, into literal ancient Babylon, we're going to discover the stories in the book of Daniel are symbolic of what will happen in end time spiritual Babylon. Now, chapters 1 to 6 are mostly stories, although chapter 2 has got implications for prophecy, of course, Daniel chapter 2. But we're going to find that the prophecy really begins in Daniel chapter 7 onwards. And so that's just quick review. Daniel in chapter 2 has given the king his dream, his interpretation. The king is flattered. The king is absolutely ecstatic. He loses his composure as a king. He kneels before Daniel. He honors Daniel. He honors the God of Daniel. He gives Daniel a promotion in his kingdom. He gives Daniel lots of gifts. Daniel asks for his 3 friends. That's the subject of our story or Bible study today or tonight. He asks for them to be also given a place in the kingdom, and they are. So the king is very, very happy with Daniel and his 3 friends. And so this dream made a huge impact upon the king, upon his wise men, whose lives were saved because of Daniel. And so the king was overjoyed that he is the head of gold. And so we find that Daniel 3 provides God's people instruction on how to live during end time events, and all the core elements of this story that we're going to study tonight in Daniel chapter 3 will be repeated. It's coming, friends. And I don't think we're going to have enough time to give chapter 2 enough time to study, so I've decided to break it into 2 parts. I'd also like to give you some time for question and answers. Maybe we can do that at the end or the beginning of next week, but we're only going to do as far as we can. Once the clock hits 7 o'clock, we'll finish there and just wind up and continue next week. And so Daniel is now promoted. He's serving the king's gate or king's court. His 3 friends are provincial leaders, governors, you might say, or satraps. They've got a high position also. Somehow things have come to a change in the king's mind, because notice how chapter 3 starts. We're going to look at the links between Daniel chapter 2 and 3, but I want you to see if you can catch the big difference here. Daniel 3 verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold. Straight away, something drastically has changed from what he was told by Daniel and what he knew, he dreamt. Now we have Nebuchadnezzar the king makes an image of gold. Now Herodotus, who is an ancient Greek historian that lived around about that time, tells us that the image that was made of gold had about 800 talents of gold. That's about 30 tons of gold was used to make this image. You know, the Babylonians believed that gold came from the sun. Now, they were sun worshippers, and they believed that the dew that would fall from the sun was gold. And so it was believed that this dripped down from the sun onto the earth. And so gold was used to represent the sun god, because gold is the color of the sun. It's a precious metal too. And so no longer do we have a 4-metal image, which was God's future and prophecy given to him through Daniel to the king. The king decides, no. I'm not happy anymore with God, the God of Daniel. the God of heaven, that he said there's no other God like him. I'm not happy with his interpretation of prophecy. I am going to make my own prophecy. And so he makes the same image, but it's all in gold. Imagine 30 tons of gold. Now, I want you to understand, it says here, the height of this very, very important detail. The Bible does not give us these details just to fill in pages. No. The Bible says, Daniel's, of course, recording this, says the height of the statue was 60 cubits. Now, 60 cubits is round about 2.7, almost 3 meters high. Can you imagine this here? 3 meters high, and then it's 6 cubits wide. So it could be the pedestal or the base, or it could be actually the bottom going up. We're not so sure. But nonetheless, that's round about 2.7 meters. So that's really high. So the height is 27. Sorry, I think I said 3. Sorry, the height is 26.7 meters high. That's about 27 meters, right, to the nearest decimal. And it's 6 cubits wide, which is about 2.7 meters to the nearest decimal, 3 meters. And so I want you to understand something very, very important. You can check me out on this here. The Babylonians were the inventors of the sexagesimal system. You ask me, what is the sexagesimal system? It is the number based on the number 60. It's the numerical system, rather, based on the number 60. So, for example, we get our 60 seconds in a minute from the Babylonians. We get our 60 minutes in the hour from the Babylonians. And we get our 300, they had a 360-day calendar, which was 6 times 36. And of course, our 360 degrees as well comes from the sexagesimal system, which was from Babylonian times. Now you can have multiples of almost 12 into 60, whereas today our decimal system, which is like the unit of 100, you can only have up to 10. So it was somewhat superior, and we still have some of the things coming through. Now, if you multiply 6 times 60, you get 360, of course. Now, 360 was a very sacred number in Babylon. It was 360 degrees. Of course, the sun, friends, every circle is 360 degrees. But more than this here, if you take, now the Babylonians had 36 main gods, and they believed that the universe was 360 degrees, and each god of the 36 was in charge of 10 of these planets. And over and above these 36 was the one god, Marduk, who is really the sun god. And so the sun god was in charge of all the other gods. And now if you take the number 6, it was actually the number of the serpent. If you look at the number 6, when you write it out, it's like a serpent being coiled, you know, the head coming down and being coiled at the bottom into, you know, when a snake wants to strike you, its tail is coiled at the bottom and then rises up at the top. So even the serpent is like a number 6. And even the sound of 6, it's a hissing sound of a serpent. And of course, the serpent was in charge of the sun. There's much more I can tell, but our time is going. So 36 gods were in charge over the Babylonian pantheon of gods, and each one ruled 10 degrees of space and time, which is, you times that, of course, you get 36. And now if you add, my friends, if you take a calculator and add 1 plus 36, 1 plus 35, 1 plus 34, if you add it all, you get to guess what number? 666. That's a significant number of Bible prophecy in Revelation chapter 12. We're going to look at that next week. I'll just bring this all together. So it was the great number of the sun god, and Marduk was called the sun god, and he was thought to be the absolute ruler of time, all time and space. So the Babylonian priestly system, by the way, also had, they wore medallions, like a sort of like a chain. And on the medallion, they would have 36 squares and fitted into one. And they would have the picture of the sun on the backside of it. And so they were sun worshippers. This image was in dedication to the sun god. And friends, notice what happens here. It says King Nebuchadnezzar, set it up, the image. Remember, God had set up his kingdom through the prophecy of Daniel chapter 2. And the 4 metal image with a stone that strikes in the feet of iron and clay, which represent the kingdom of God. And so Nebuchadnezzar says, no. There's going to be no other kingdom after me. Babylon will rule forever. And archaeologists have found bricks. I've told you that. And there's the Nebuchadnezzar cylinder where he says himself, Babylon, may it rule forever. It's the pride of my kingdom. And so let's go on here. Daniel chapter 3, verses 2. Then King Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces. So what strikes you as you read that text? These are all political leaders. These are people who form part of the government. And of course, there's also ambassadors that come there. There's rulers of the province. There's treasurers there. There's judges. This is a great gathering of all the who is who in the Babylonian Empire. So the king has sent for all these people to come. It is believed that possibly Zedekiah, who was the last king in Jerusalem, may have been here at this dedication because he made a trip to Babylon around about this time here. But we can't tell that for sure. Now, I want you to know something. In Babylon, I showed you some pictures there of lions on the walls. There was 300 of these lions on the walls. So lions were pictured also as part of the kingdom of Babylon. And we're going to see in Daniel chapter 7, the symbols are now beasts. And the symbol for Babylon was a lion with eagle's wings. And I just showed you pictures there. I'll just go very quickly back to it there. Maybe you didn't catch the eagle, the wings. So here's the lion, and you can see along the side here at the bottom, this is a wing. So it's got two, one on this side and one on the other side. So this is a lion with eagle's wings. And so this is how Babylon was depicted as the king of beasts, most powerful nation, and a lion with wings. So notice King Nebuchadnezzar says he invites all these important people to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So here's this massive imposing image on the plains of Judah, just outside of the city of Babylon. And so you've got this tall, I mean, that's higher than a two-story building. And it's made out of about 30 tons of gold, Herodotus tells us. And it's 3 meters wide and 27 meters high. The Babylonians were masters at mathematics and astronomy. That's why you had the astrologers there and the astronomers. And so they were brilliant. So what is the king trying to do? The king is trying to change God's prophecy and trying to put his own interpretation. And we're going to discover in the end time, spiritual, mystical Babylon also tries to change God's prophecy, God's times and laws, just as the literal king of Babylon tried to do. So what is literal and local in Daniel chapter 2, and Daniel chapter 3 is going to have an end time spiritual significance. And so he changes God's interpretation of prophecy and he says, no, it will be. Now, what is the links between Daniel chapter 2 and 3? First of all, gold. Remember, the image in Daniel chapter 2 had a head of gold. So we've got this image, it's of gold. What else can we say? There's more. The word image is used in Daniel chapter 2. So it's Aramaic equivalent. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. So the same Greek word is used. So gold and gold in both chapters, image and image in both chapters, and also the expression set up, because Daniel told the king that this is God's set up. This is how the future will be. But now the king has set up his own future. And he's claiming that his kingdom is indestructible. We're going to discover in the story today. So here's a lion, right? Now, when its mane is opened like this here, can you see it looks like it's the picture of the sun, right? The mane with its wavy things going out 360 degrees is the rays of the sun. And of course, the face is there. And so look at that. That's what that depicts. And so a lion also, its color looks like gold, especially its mane. And of course, the king of beasts. And so in Daniel chapter 2, the symbol for the kingdom of Babylon is the lion. But it has eagle's wings. We'll discover why eagle's wings. So I want you to understand something. Because this was such a huge project, it involved 30 tons of gold. It was so high. They would have to have erected a scaffolding, and the artisans would have had to have worked timelessly. So we don't know how long this image or statue would have taken to be built, but I'd like to believe it must have taken a couple of months, quite a while. And while this was being built, of course, Daniel, who was on the king's cabinet, he must have had an idea what was happening. And we could discover in this story, Daniel is not here. Perhaps the king made sure at the dedication of this image that Daniel is not going to be there. So maybe he sent away on king's business to some other part of the world, or maybe Daniel was sick, or for whatever reason. But I think the king was happy Daniel's not there, because he's thinking, if Daniel is going to be here, there's no way Daniel is going to obey my instructions. So what are the instructions of the king? Well, in Daniel chapter 3, verse 4, it says, then a herald, so someone in the government comes and he cries out aloud, and he's addressing all the dignitaries, the political people there. And of course, there's a huge gathering of people from all over the world, from the empire of Babylon. We'll see the text just now. And so he addresses everyone. He cries out loud. He says, to you, it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at the sound of the music, everyone must bow down. I want to tell you, the main thing that's happening here in Daniel chapter 2 is worship. It's about worship, how you worship, who you worship. A companion chapter in the book of Revelation, those of you who have done the Revelation study, you'll be able to go back and check your notes. Daniel chapter 2 is the companion. What happened in local literal Babylon happens in end time spiritual Babylon. The king of Babylon, also known as the little horn, and also known as that great mother of harlots, in the book of Revelation chapter 17. And so the question in here, Daniel chapter 2, is whose will you worship? How will you worship? And I want to tell you, it's to do with the battle between the God of heaven and the gods of Babylon. Sun worship. Sun worship. In the end time scenario, the number 666 is prevalent in Revelation chapter 12. At the end of the chapter, the number of the man, the leader of the system of Babylon, spiritual Babylon, his number is 666. It has to be computed in Roman numerals because it was a Roman power. And those days, names were symbolic of future meanings. And so I want you to know something here. Now, the word worship is used 11 times in the book of Daniel chapter 3, 5 to 7. And of course, in chapters 3, 10 to 12, 14, 15, 18, and 28, 11 times. It has to do with the law of God, or the law of man, the law of the king of Babylon. That's what's the issue here. That's the main issue here. And so we worship God because he's the creator, and we have to understand he has a sign. We're going to look at it in Daniel chapter 7. What is the sign of true worship to the creator God? And so that's for future. Anyhow, Daniel 3 verse 5. So this is what the herald is saying to everyone there that's assembled before the dedication of the statue or the image of gold in the plains of Judah. So there were tens of thousands of people there, people from all over the nations, different languages, and many political leaders. So they were told, at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, the psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down, and what's that word? Worship. Worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. So here you have it. It's about worship, and the king has set this up. And it is in contravention, or it is antagonistic against the kingdom and the worship of God. Daniel 3 verse 6. This is what the king's decree. That's why I call it a death decree. Notice what it says here in Daniel 3 verse 6. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst or the middle of a burning fiery furnace. And so here is the king's decree. It's a law against God's law. The first table of God's law. The first four commandments in the 10 commandments. The first one, thou shalt have no other gods before me. The second one, thou shalt not bow down to any graven images. The third one, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And the fourth one, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. all these four were involved in the king going against God's law, because now he makes his law on how to worship, whom you will worship, and bowing down to fall to this idol. And so it's in contravention to the first table of God's law. So here is where the rubber meets the road. So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre in symphony, so they had a very good, well-talented orchestra there. They had stringed instruments, they had wind instruments, all kinds of music. When that was to be played, they were to fall down. It says all the people, nations, and languages fell down to worship the golden image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Almost all, we're going to discover. Just 3 people did not fall down to worship. But the vast majority there, the thousands and thousands of people, all the political figures, all the kings who were there, all the governors, the treasurers, all who were there, they all fell down and they paid homage and worshipped the image of the sun. That's why I call it the image of the beast. You see, King Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 4, it's one of my favorite chapters, he actually becomes like a beast. So he's a beast that raises an image. And so in Daniel chapter 3 and 4, we've got a beast, a king, who raises an image, a golden image. In Revelation chapter 13, we've got the beast that is spiritual Babylon in end time setting, who also raises an image. Well, the 2-horned beast raised an image to the first beast. Incredible, incredible. Now I want you to see what happens here. Daniel chapter 3 verse 8. Therefore, at that certain time, Chaldeans, now the Chaldeans were what you can say, the PhDs, they were the religious leaders of the king of the kingdom of Babylon. They also featured in Daniel chapter 2, because and so here they come now to the king, and they've got an accusation against certain people. Notice how they come to the king. And I believe they were the ones that probably encouraged the king to bring this forward. But here's what they said to the king. Therefore, at that time, when everyone bowed except some people, the Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. You can imagine the snarl on their face now. They tell the king, these guys don't respect you. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Remember, they had this promotion at the end of Daniel chapter 2. So they are accusing the king, the Chaldeans now, that you've set, there's these guys who are Jews that you have given power and authority in your government. They are over the province of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Notice the accusation. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you by not falling down to worship your image, which is basically you. They do not serve your gods. Again, you see the context between the contest between the gods of Babylon and the God of heaven, the true God. It's the same scenario in the end time setting of spiritual Babylon, which is still future. And so they accused these 3 guys here. These are people that you have given position in your government. Now, they don't serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. And you can imagine they stood out like a sore thumb amongst the vast number of people that all fell down and bowed to worship the image of the sun. That image, that number was 666. This was incredible. How is it possible? I want you to know this image was not only a sign for Nebuchadnezzar of his indestructible and eternal nature or kingdom of Babylon, but to bow down to it was a sign of allegiance to the civil power and the religious power. Because the king had made a decree, that's the political power, but it had to involve worship, religion. And so it is in the end time scenario. the death decree by mystical Babylon, the great mother of all harlots, will also have a decree that will have a political setup with religious connotations and worship. That's the key issues in Daniel chapter 13 and 14, Revelation 13, 14. And so it is here in Daniel chapter 3. And so the image had a mark. What do you think its mark was? The calculation of the sun, 666. And so it was about worship, and it was about worshiping the sun. I could say a bit more about that. I'm going to just carry on for the sake of time. Daniel 3 verses 13, because we only got 5 minutes left. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Now remember, these men were well known to the king. These were Hebrews. These were men that he found when he examined them 3 years after he came to power in 605 BC. He found them to be 10 times wiser than his wise men. And these are the friends of Daniel that were promoted at the end of Daniel chapter 2. And so as they come before the king, they are ushered before the king. The king is furious. It reminds me, friends, of Revelation chapter 12, verse 17, because it says there that the dragon was wroth with the woman, God's people, who kept the commandments of God and tries to destroy them. So here's these 3 boys, or 3 men, I should say. They've kept the commandments of God. They know they shouldn't bow down to idols. They must only worship the true God, not the sun God. And there is a big contest now between them and the king. Notice what the king says to them. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, calls them by the Babylonian names, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image which I have set up?" You see what it is? It's about worship. The king has set it up. Notice basically what he says to them. I'm going to give you guys a second chance. You've embarrassed me here. I know maybe you didn't mean it, but now, you know, if you will just go back now, I'm going to play the music a second time. You know, the devil always tries to coax us, threaten us first, and then coax us into disobeying God's commandments. But these men were not about to do that, as we look into our study right now. And so he's saying, I'm going to give you a second chance. And now notice what he says to them. Now, Daniel 3:15. Now, if you're ready at the time that you hear the sound of all the music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good, your life will be spared. This is the same king that threatened to kill all the wise men in Daniel chapter 2. And these are the men that helped reveal his dream and gave interpretation. Now he's telling them, listen, if you guys don't fall down after I give you a second chance, this is what's going to happen to you. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace. And so here's the death decree. It's got to do with worship. It's got an end time scenario. The oven was there. They could see the flames. Now, I want you to know in Baghdad, you can still see the remnants of the war that happened several years ago. There's still oil wells there. Lots of oil was available. They used to take chaff, right? What was left over from the harvest, mix it with crude oil, and that could burn long and burn very, very hot. So they could see the flames there. So this was the issue here. They understood this commandment. Exodus 20 verse 4 and 5. You shall not make yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. They understood the commandments of God and they were not willing to compromise. This story helps us to understand how we can prepare for the end time scenario when the beast of Revelation, that is Babylon, mystical Babylon, will have a decree that all people, if they do not have the mark of the beast, which is about worship, will also be slain, will be killed. So here they are. They did not need a second chance. I want you to hear how they answered. This is how you and I should always be, friends. True as the eye is the needle of the pole. Notice what they said to the king. Very respectfully, I would say, O King Nebuchadnezzar, they said, we have no need to answer in this matter. In other words, we don't need a second chance. Our minds are already made up. If that is the case, if you want to burn us, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. Here's another key word. Well, I'll unpack this next week because it's about deliverance. You'll discover at the end of this chapter, God delivers his people. and the end time Babylon that tries to destroy God's people in Revelation chapter 13 and 14, God is going to deliver them. We've got the three angels' messages that will be preached to the whole world. The first angel tells about true worship. The second angel tells about Babylon, how it's fallen from the truth, and how Babylon, this system, has caused the nations to become deceived. And then the third angel's message is a warning not to fall down and bow down to the worship system, which is the mark of the beast of end time Babylon. That's still future, friends, still future. But what's happening in Daniel chapter 3 is going to be replayed, but on a spiritual and also political and religious level. So this is what they said to the king. And he will deliver us from your hand, O king. So in other words, they're saying, listen, our God that we serve, he can deliver us. And if we have to die, we will die. But he will still deliver us. And then they said to the king, O king, but if not, if God doesn't choose to deliver us from the flames, let it be known unto you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. It was, friends, about worship. It was the king's law, the king of Babylon, against God's law. And so the king made a big mistake because he threatens them and he tells them, who is that God who will deliver you? Who is that God who will deliver you? I'm going to end in the next text, and then we'll pick it up from next week. So the king is furious. He's absolutely rageous. He is wrath. And the command is given to grab these three guys because they've embarrassed the king. Notice what happens. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Whereas before he wanted to give them a second chance, try and save their skin, and also save him from embarrassment. When they said, no, we will not, O king, he was, of course, embarrassed amongst all the dignitaries there, his cabinet and everyone who was assembled there. And so the king says, okay, I'm going to take care of you guys. And I think we're going to leave it there. We'll pick up the story next week, part 2, how God delivers his boys, how God comes through the flames. And this is also with very, very important end time prophecy messages when mystical Babylon will enforce the decrees of the mark of the beast, which is 666, and how God will take care of his people, because the 7 last plagues, God is going to deliver his people and destroy mystical Babylon. We're going to discover the king tells the men to heat the oven 7 times hotter, which is a number of totality. In other words, the king wasn't there with a thermometer saying, okay, it's 1,000 degrees, boys, heat it up to 7,000. No, it means a number of totality, a number of perfection. In other words, the hottest we can make this fire, I want these guys to be incinerated. And we're going to discover that God comes through for his people through the fire, that God himself goes into the flames with his people. And so it will be in the end time scenario. And so we're going to leave it there for tonight. And I just want you to please read the rest of the chapter. We're going to look at the end time scenario. I'm going to take you a little bit in the book of Revelation as well. We're going to have a recap on Revelation, how the death decree fits in, and how the story ends. Because the story ends and the king, once again, is bowing down the God of heaven. And so let's pray as we close. Father in heaven, thank you for this fascinating story that happened more than 2,500 years ago. The king of Babylon, defying the God of heaven, sets up his own image, sets up his own laws in place of your laws, and it's to do with worship. Thank you that we can learn how to stand like Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. Thank you that we can learn from your promises that we too in the end time can go through and you will deliver us. It's all about deliverance. When we get to Daniel 12 verse 1, Michael stands up and delivers his people. May you deliver us this week from whatever we face. Help us in all our challenges. Be with us as we seek to prepare for next week. We love you, Lord, and thank you for each one who came tonight. Bless each home and heart in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.